Welcome, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you on the Profitable Regeneration webinar series. We are pleased to have William DeMille with us here today. Before we introduce William, we're going to start with a prayer, and we've asked Justin Morris from Idaho if he would please offer that prayer for us.
Our Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this opportunity that we have to meet here in this AgSteward webinar and to be able to hear the presentation that William DeMille has put together on soil health. We are very grateful, Father, for the great blessing of moisture that many of us have received, and we are grateful for the means by which this technology is able to bring us together, that we may be able to learn together and to be able to continue on in our path of not only regenerating the landscape, but also regenerating our mindset. We pray, Father, for thy Spirit to be with us, and that we may be able to have our minds and our hearts opened, and that we may be able to look for ways to implement the things which we're learning onto our landscapes. And this we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Very good. Thank you, Justin. Appreciate that prayer. And so, yes, welcome everybody. So we do these webinars twice a month. My wife and I started AgSteward at the end of last year. The goal to help family-owned farms and ranches become highly profitable, regenerate the land that they steward, and pass on viable businesses to the next generation. Soil health is a key component to that mission because it really all starts at the soil level. And so we want to focus on that. And on the questionnaire that I have sent out to people, I ask, how many of you have a soil fertility plan? It's interesting that very few people actually do have something that's actually a plan, meaning that it's written out, that you put time, thought into it, something that you can follow, something you can test and measure and adjust and grow with. And to be honest, for years, many years, we operated this ranch without any kind of a plan, other than occasionally, when we had extra water and extra money, we would apply some fertilizer. I don't know if we ever even really did soil testing. But in the last decade or so, I've been blessed to meet individuals like Gabe Brown and Nicole Master, others who work with the soil health consultants, and realize just the importance of soil health, learning about the biology. As farmers and ranchers, our most important asset is that underground herd of livestock, the microbes that we care for. So William's going to talk to us some about that and just kind of share what his mission is to be able to regenerate landscapes. And he's an avid gardener. He came to work for us a couple years ago, nearly 3 years ago now, and we hired him. Just feel very fortunate to have him. We originally reached out and see if he would consult and help us build a year-round greenhouse. He ended up coming to work for us, and so we've just been very blessed by his presence here on the ranch. He grows the bulk of the fresh fruits and vegetables that we eat. Potatoes, we handle the meat, the milk, and the eggs on the ranch. And so it's neat to see that, if for whatever reason we couldn't go to the grocery store, we would certainly not starve, and we would be very well fed on a very well-rounded diet because of William. He is able to, even though the majority of the consulting that he does is on maybe a smaller scale, on a gardening scale, but he definitely understands large scale as well. The principles work, whether you're small, large, anywhere in between. I know a lot of folks that are joining me today, maybe you're just growing things in their backyard. If you're just growing things in a planter, that's fine. Or if you're managing thousands, or some of our clients even over 1 million acres, it doesn't matter. The principles work regardless of the size. So let's go ahead and kick it off and welcome William DeMille. William, what made you, I'll ask you one question here first, and then you can jump into your presentation. What made you want to be a farmer, a grower?
Well, I grew up on our family ranch. We had a small farm in town, and then we had grazing land on Kolob Mountain and some BLM land. My grandpa managed all that, and I just loved everything that was agriculture. I loved the cattle. I loved and all the other livestock. We had sheep, we had milk cows, goats, and horses. I loved riding horses. And I couldn't imagine my life being anything else other than just being a part of the land. And then when I went off to college, they were teaching us to do things that were quite a bit different than we had ever done. And so I put some of those things into practice, and it didn't work as good as the way the old people did it in where I was. And now at this point in my life, I realized that what we were doing before I went to college is the way it should have been done all along, which is what we call organic or regenerative. And so once I saw the difference, I thought, yeah, all this newfangled stuff, it's not working, and it's not going to work. So.
Yeah, great for that introduction. You also said that you started growing food at a very young age.
Yeah. I was always in the garden with my dad. And when I was 11 years old, I said, Dad, I want to do the garden. And he said, okay, I'll do it with you this year. And if you're there with me for every step the whole way through, the next year you can take over. And so I was motivated, and I was there for every part of it that whole year. The next year, as a 12-year-old, I grew the food for our family that year. And I did have help from, my grandma and grandpa and brothers and my dad, but I was the one in charge. I'm the one who made the decision. I made the plan, and I did probably, I don't know. I think I did most of the work, but as a 12-year-old, I probably didn't. But it was a real confidence builder, the way my dad handled that. He didn't say, you're too young. He didn't say, no, he didn't say, and he didn't just turn it over to me. He worked with me on understanding the seeds, understanding the compost, understanding every little detail for an entire growing season and through the winter, because there's quite a bit you do in the winter also. So yeah, that got me excited, and I've been doing it ever since. And I'm turning 50 this year, so it's been a while.
Yeah, so you got a few years of experience. That's great. Well, good. Well, how this thing works is if you have questions during the presentation, clarification and things, you can either type it in the chat or raise your virtual hand, which is there should be a button down at the bottom under reactions. Just raise your hand, we'll call on you. We will do question and answers at the end. And so if it needs to be clarification or whatever, you can certainly interrupt. But for the most part, we'll just let William run with it. And this is being recorded and repurposed as a podcast. So that's the way we do that. We like to keep it interactive, but we'll save most of the interaction to the end. So with that, William, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Jared. I'm going to share my screen here a little bit so we can have a visual as we go through here. Okay, Jared, can you see that?
Yep. Yeah, it looks good.
All right. So we can actually approach soil health from so many different perspectives. And I'm just going to approach this today from the idea of the farmers I've known throughout the world have always struggled with profitability. And so right now in the world, the four big expenses, and I think this is pretty accurate in relationship, like fertilizer is the most biggest expense right now. Fuel is the number 2 expense. And just a few years ago, fuel was the biggest expense. So these things change orders. And then labor is a pretty big expense. Machinery is a big expense. And there's other expenses, but these are many of the things that cause a problem with farmers being able to stay in business, to be profitable, and to be able to raise their family on the land. And number 5 there is relationships. That's a big expense too, because if our finances are messed up and we're not profitable, that is a big strain on family relationships. Now, I think the 2 biggest challenges in the agriculture world today is producing enough food to feed the hungry and then creating nutritious food. Now, let me be clear on number 1 there on producing enough food. It's not that we can't produce enough volume of food. It's just that we can't get enough food to the people who need it. And there's a whole lot of problems with that. So we're going to address a few of these things today in a way that we can see what we can do in our own garden, in our own home, on our own ranches, if we're raising livestock, and in our own big farms, if we're raising grains and other commodity crops. So this is my greenhouse where I raise a lot of food. And as you can see, it looks kind of like a jungle. And the thing that we focus on is we try to mimic nature. So when you go to Mother Nature and we look at the ecologies that are out there that produce the most energy per acre, it's places like the redwoods and other big old growth forests. And we actually measure that energy in those ecologies by calories. So we can actually count how many calories are produced per acre in those areas. So the redwoods produces a lot more calories per acre than any human agriculture ever has, which is interesting. And when we think of calories, that can be confusing because it doesn't translate into human food calories because we're not eating redwood or the stuff that grows in the redwoods. But the energy that is used to create those plants is massive. And so how does the soil do that? Because we can't come close to creating that in our own farms. So when we look closely at the soil and understand the processes that are happening in the soil, then we can bring that information back to our own farms. And what we have learned from these forests that are producing this amazing amount of energy, we can learn exactly what's happening. And it does work in our gardens, it works in our cropland, and it works in our pastures. So the same thing is happening no matter what plants we're growing. And so we can totally mimic nature, and it works really, really well. So this is a diagram of the 4 ecological processes. So all of the energy of the earth comes from the sun. Now, old energy is we can harvest that and mine it in the form of fossil fuels. And so that is sun's energy that was stored in things like oil and coal. And then we refine it down into other products that we can burn in our cars and tractors and all that stuff. But if we realize that all energy comes from the sun, then that helps us to become more profitable if we start using less of the ancient fuel and we start capturing more sunlight by growing more plants on our farm right now. So instead of growing 1 crop a year on our farm, we could grow many crops a year. So we may have a cornfield, and that's going to take 5-6 months for that corn crop. And then the traditional thing has been to just let it sit the rest of the year. But if we will get a seed in the ground at the time of corn harvest, or maybe even before, then those crops can grow up throughout the fall and early winter. They go dormant in the winter, and then in the springtime they grow up, and then we can knock them flat on the ground, and then we rotate to our soybeans for the next year's cash crop. What that is doing, it's taking the energy of the sun through the living plant and putting that energy into the soil in the form of microbiology food. And then that food feeds that microbiome, and the microbiome creates the plant food. And that means we don't have to buy fertilizer. Now, it takes 3 to 5 years to get to a point where you don't need fertilizer anymore. So don't just stop using fertilizer. You probably can't grow a crop this year. It takes time to figure that out. And so you need, if you've never done this or heard of this, you need to learn more about it before you just go off and try it. And then there's the mineral cycle. The mineral cycle is the process of creating the plant food specifically. So this is where the bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, encotriids, earthworms, and all of the other organisms that are down there in the soil, all the bugs, all the flying insects, all of those organisms will be creating the plant food to grow our plants. They are fueled by the sun, which is the energy flow, But the way that the nitrogen cycle works and all of the other mineral cycles, they need to have the biology in the soil of all of these groups. If you only have bacteria, then you're going to have problems. And if you only have, fungus or mostly fungus, you're going to have problems. We need to have a balance of all of these microgroups in the soil to be able to grow the food crops that we want. And then the third one is ecological succession. And this is what the earth is naturally trying to do. It's trying to go from bare ground to an old growth forest. If you leave land alone and don't do anything to it, it will eventually turn into a forest. In some climates, that could take 10, 20, 30,000 years. In other climates, it takes 5 or 6 years. When I lived on a farm in Missouri, if you weren't cutting hay in your pastures every year, you had to go out about every 3 or 4 years and mow it down anyway, or else you'd have trees starting to come up everywhere. So this is a natural process of the earth of trying to get from bare ground, and then it goes to annual weeds and plants start growing, and then perennials start growing, the grasslands are growing, and then you start getting lots of bushes and shrubs, small trees. Eventually you get the great big giant trees that grow for a long time. So that's the idea of ecological succession. So the point to this that is practical that we need to remember on our own farms and ranches is we need to create the soil type to grow the plants we want. So if we want to grow food producing plants, most of those grow in mid-succession, which means if we look back at the mineral cycle, that our bacteria and fungus need to be in equal amounts. Our fungal to bacterial ratios need to be kind of similar. And most of our agriculture today does not have a good fungal component. And that's why we have to add fertilizer to grow the food crops. So that takes us to number 4, which is the water cycle. And the water cycle is pretty basic, pretty simple, but there are some important things that we are overlooking in our modern world. So just simply, the water cycle, you have water on the ground because the ground is wet after a rain. The ground is maybe saturated with water. It's drying out quickly. There's water in streams, in ponds, in rivers, in lakes, and then it evaporates. And it turns into clouds when it condenses up in the sky. And then we get precipitation in the form of rain, snow, depending on the time of year. And when that rain comes down, it will hit the ground. If we have a functioning good soil, it will infiltrate into the soil. And that is the goal. That's what we want. But if we have a compacted soil where the soil is not functioning well at all, and we don't have good biology in the soil, then the water will generally run off. Now, even the very best functioning soils, if you get enough rain, it will still run off. But let's say you get a 20-inch rain in 2 hours. All soils, it's going to run off with that much rain. But you can tell if your soil is functioning and if that water cycle is working good. If you go out there when the water's running off the field, take a glass, like a drinking glass, and fill it with water. If it looks nice and clear, like you could get a drink out of it, like it came out of your tap, then that means your soil is functioning. It is infiltrating. Things are good. But if your soil is muddy and you would never drink that water because it's half mud, then you have bad problems with your soil and your water cycle is not working good and it is eroding that soil away. And you're probably going to need to irrigate that field in a week after a 20-inch rain because you didn't keep any water in that soil. Okay, so let's just go through some of the principles really quickly. There are 8 important organisms that we need to make these 4 cycles work properly. We need really high populations and lots of, like a high population in numbers and a high population of specific species of all the different beneficial bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes, the microarthropods, the enchytraeids, the macroarthropods, and the earthworms in our soils. Now, you don't have to memorize and learn all of that. I'm just telling you because most soils have way too much bacteria and hardly any of the other ones. That's what I'm seeing as I do soil tests from people all over the place. I run a soil lab, so I look at a lot of soil samples. The second thing to remember is there are 6 spheres of the soil. There's the phyllosphere, which is the plant material. So that is the leaf surface of plants. And one of the best soil scientists there is, his name's Ray Archuleta, he just added this phyllosphere recently within the last year to this list. So there used to be 5 spheres of the soil. So this is brand new science here. So the phyllosphere is the leaf surface of the plant. That leaf surface will have microbes living on it, and they actually communicate with the microbes that are under the ground in the soil. Now, we don't know how they do it. They probably have a cell phone and make a phone call. I don't know. But if you don't have the phyllosphere, then the whole mineral cycle doesn't work as well without it. So having a living plant growing as much as you possibly can on your soils is very important to keep these soil spheres working. And then you have the detritosphere. That is the dead organic matter that's on top of the soil surface. And this does several things. It insulates the soil from temperature. It keeps the soil moisture in the soil so it doesn't evaporate. It feeds the microbes that I've already talked about. And so it's very important to have that dead plant material that is decomposing on that soil surface. The agrotosphere are the aggregates where these organisms live. And so when you dig up a shovel full of soil, you should see a cottage cheese type texture. And all those little balls of dirt that look like little curds of cottage cheese, those are the aggregates. And in between the aggregates, you have air space or pore space. And that's what the porosphere is. And that's where all of your water goes when it infiltrates into the soil, is that porosphere. The rhizosphere are the roots in the soil. And the rhizosphere, or the roots, they will put carbon into the soil from the atmosphere. This carbon that they put into the soil is another food source for those important microbes that are in the soil. So they have plenty of food to eat. And then there's the drillosphere, and those are the tunnels that are made by the earthworms, which gets massive amounts of rain and nutrients down into the soil. And when the water flows through those earthworm tunnels or the drillosphere, then when it stops raining and the water is flowing down through, it sucks in oxygen because the water is heavier than air, so the water will flow down through quickly, and the oxygen is pulled into the soil. And oxygen is one of our it's probably the most important nutrient in the soil. And so that's kind of how those 6 spheres work. So we need to build soils that have all of those in there. And then but the things I've told you are nothing to do. Those are just things that would need to happen, that they just happen naturally. It's a process of nature, but we don't go out there on our tractor and we cannot phyllosphere. We can't nematode. These are not things we do. So the soil health principles are the things we do. And they are mindfulness, context, no-till. These are action words. These are the things that we actually do. So mindfulness is being present in the moment and making decisions for this year based on what's happening this year, not worrying about the past or worrying about the future. Get worry out of our mind and just be mindful of what's happening now, and then we make the best decisions. Context is making sure that we're doing the right thing in the climate where we live. We would never want to grow rice on the top of the mountaintops at 10,000 feet. It's not going to grow there. That would certainly be out of context. Yet we find agriculturists all the time trying to do things that are out of context for the climate where they live. no-till. A lot of people call this minimal tillage because sometimes it could be appropriate to do some tillage. But I like to call it no-till because it reinforces the importance of not tilling. If we till, it's just driving a wrecking bar through the big ball and chain on where you're going to take down a building. You blast that through your house, and then you expect to get up in the morning and go to work and be as productive as you were the day before. What I mean by that analogy is that when we till the soil, we destroy the home for all of the 8 important organism groups. We destroy the detritosphere, the agrotosphere, and the porosphere. And so the fungi, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, they are being destroyed. Their house is no longer there. So before they can be productive to create free fertilizer for us, which is our most expensive input in farming, before they're productive to do that, they have to rebuild their home, and that takes time. So we want to get away from tillage if possible. And of course, we keep the ground covered, and that's what the detritosphere is all about, where we're keeping the ground covered with living plants and with dead plants. And then the living root in the soil, that's where we're keeping plants growing all the time. Animal impact is fantastic. If you have a big herd of cattle, you can get the microbes that we've talked about on the land the quickest with a herd of cattle. That's the best way to do it. If you don't have a herd of cattle, then you need to learn how to make compost in the proper way to be able to get the microbes out there. But see, Mother Nature figured this out long before people ever figured out compost. And the microbes have been being introduced to poor soils for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, with the big grazing animals, bison, wildebeest, as they move across the landscape. So animal impact is imperative to soil health. And of course, diversity. There's a real problem with soil health when we have monocrops. We need to have as many plants growing together as makes sense so that it fits within our context. And then these are the things that make the 4 ecological processes work. And again, that's the water cycle, mineral cycle, ecological succession, and energy flow. So we need to know how those things are working. So I'm going to move on here a little bit. And this is a picture of me making compost. So this is a compost pile. We do have cattle here on the ranch, and we use them as a tool to inoculate the land with these important microbes. In the gardening setting, we do use cattle, but we don't have the cattle go in the greenhouse because one cow in the greenhouse would destroy a lot of things for obvious reasons. So we can use manure from the cattle, and we use that in the greenhouse. We can use that to help to feed the compost. The compost is not to create soil fertility specifically. In other words, it's not a fertilizer. We make the compost to grow the beneficial organisms. And then we take 5 gallons of compost, we mix that with about 100 gallons of water, and then we can use that water, and we call that a compost extract. We use that water, and then we put that out on the land. It can go a long way because we're putting about 20 gallons per acre, more or less. And compost pile can do a lot of land. If it has a lot of organisms in it, then you can use less than a 5-gallon bucket in 100 gallons of water. And then we can put those microbes out there, and you can do hundreds and hundreds of acres. So it's a fantastic tool. So here's an up close of the compost, and you can see different organisms on here in the picture, but there's different kinds of fungus that you can see growing in the compost. When you see mushrooms and toadstools growing out of your compost, you know you're doing it the right way. And then earthworms is how we finish a compost to collect the maximum amount of beneficial organisms. So we would make a compost for maybe, a month or 2, and you turn it every time it gets hot enough for long enough. And then you would let it cool down. And that's when you add the earthworms, and then the earthworms eat it for about a year, anywhere from a year to 14, 15 months. And then it will be at a stage where it has the most microbes it's going to collect. And then that's when you would take the 5-gallon bucket, mix it with water, and get it on your land, whether it's a garden or a pasture or a hayfield or wild country in the mountains where you're growing grass because it's where you're grazing cattle, or if it's pastures or whatever. Diversity is important. We have to have diversity. In my garden, it looks like a jungle. I don't have straight rows with specific crops. I don't keep it cultivated between the furrows like an old-fashioned garden. We just grow a jungle of all kinds of things. When you have 4 plant families that are growing close enough together that the roots are touching, what will happen, and this is getting kind of sciencey and technical, but listen close. 4 plant families growing close enough together that the roots touch, that will grow a maximum number of microbes in the soil. When you have all those microbes in the soil, they will turn on genetics in the plants through the roots that the plants will not have turned on without the 4 plant families. Okay, so plants have different kinds of metabolites. They have primary metabolites and secondary metabolites. The primary metabolites are always there, and that's what you see, and it's easy to see it. Oh yeah, well it's a plant, it's growing, it's green, it's getting tall. That would be a primary metabolite. When all of these organisms turn on the secondary metabolites, then you have pest resistance. You have disease resistance. You have flavors that get much stronger and better and more fulfilling when we eat the plant. We have nutrition levels that go off the charts that are very high nutrition. Proteins and sugars get very high in the plants. But those secondary metabolites and those benefits of disease and pests and all those things I mentioned, it doesn't happen in a monocrop. You have to have a minimum of 4 plant families growing together for those secondary metabolites to be turned on. So in a gardening situation, plant your tomatoes and lettuce and cabbages and strawberries and onions together, and you have all those different plant families growing together. And so gardening, probably ought to change a little bit. And it's the same way in our row crops. But if you have 1,000 acres of corn, how are you going to run all these things through the corn harvester? You're not going to be able to. It's going to plug it up. But we've found that it still works in the grain world if you're growing a multi-species cover crop during the fall, early winter, and then super early spring and until you plant your corn. And then we smash that down on the ground with the roller crimper, and it's working. And we're still getting the benefit to the corn, even though they're not growing at the same time. And I haven't found a scientist who can explain exactly why, but it is working, which is fantastic. So we can still have millions of acres of crops to feed the world, and we can still have these same benefits that we're talking about, that we're seeing, even in a small garden situation. So the principles work. So here's within context of grain, you can see on the front of the tractor, there's a 3-point hitch on there. The roller crimper is going through the rye. In the springtime with the cornfield or the corn planter on the back, planting the corn. The corn will come up right in that rye, and the rye is dying anyway because it's an annual plant. It's already mature. The seed heads are up there, but you roll it down and plant the corn at the right time. You do this before the rye seed is viable. So you're not planting rye seeds because they're not quite mature enough to grow, but the plant is old enough that it's not going to be growing back. And the roller crimper in front is crimping those stalks of rye every 4 to 6 inches, depending on the size of your roller crimper. And so it is releasing the moisture from those. So within a week to 2 weeks, this whole field, it won't be green, it'll be yellow because it'll quickly dry. And then in another 3 or 4 weeks, you'll see your corn coming up. And in the middle of the summer, you have great benefits to this because a tillage field next door, they will be needing lots of rain, but this will be holding a lot of moisture in the soil. In the garden, there's diversity here. We have a lot of different kinds of lettuce. We have cole crops here, and you can see that I'm planting with the drill on the right side of the picture. For those of you who see the picture, there's the drill auger, and we are putting in the cabbage and broccoli plants here about 2 weeks before the lettuce is going to come out. So we're getting that living root established before it comes out. And this is not the way normal gardening is. But if you can possibly plant before you're harvesting, that is fantastic for the soil. You always want to be doing that. Make sure that your gardens are looking like jungles. If you don't have a lot of plants growing in your pastures where cattle are eating, they won't get the same nutritional benefits as like your improved pastures that were the thing 20 years ago. Everybody's talking about improved pastures, which meant you had one species in that pasture. The cattle required a lot more mineral than nowadays when we have cattle in these pastures that have 20, 30 species, and the soil's functioning so well that the cattle are not going to the mineral tubs. They're not eating as much mineral because they have such a fantastic diet to choose from. I'm not saying to not give your cattle mineral. I'm saying that there have been a lot of people saying they're noticing that the consumption that the cattle are choosing to eat is lowering. And so why would that be? It's because they're getting the nutrition that they're supposed to get because of the functioning soils and the diversity of all the different plants that are growing out there. So I wrote my book with all this information in it, and I was super excited about it. And I always like to tell people about my book because I've been working on this for almost 40 years. And so that's exciting to be able to share this information, because it's brand new information that I think people need to be able to get access to, because it can be complicated at first to understand how to get this out there. With the work that we're doing, we're finding that we can change deserts into grasslands. The great work that Alejandro's been doing and many other people around the world, we're seeing the deserts becoming green. And it's working because we're getting the microbes into the soil. And people are doing it with compost or they're doing it with cattle. Either way works. They both get the microbes out there. And then with strict management on the land, the soils are healing and the grasses are starting to grow where we once had the deserts before. The deserts that we're talking about in North America are the Great Basin Desert, which is most of Nevada, a lot of Utah, parts of other states. And then there's the Mojave Desert, which is the smallest one, mostly in California and parts of Nevada. Then there's the Sonoran Desert and the Chihuahuan Desert. And when we think of deserts, we don't think of lush, beautiful 3-4 foot tall grass. But in areas where people are doing these principles, that is exactly what is happening. The grasses are coming back and they are thriving, even though deserts are places with low rainfall. So you don't need as much rain to grow grasslands as we think. What we need to do is manage the land where we restore the microbes, and then we keep the microbes alive by creating a home for them. Microbes are our most important livestock. They're just like cattle or horses or any other livestock. They want food, they want water, and they want a home like any other livestock. And if that's what we give them, we will be fixing our soils. And so our gardens around our homes will be thriving, giving us more nutritious food, and our agricultural adventures will be becoming profitable because we're not having to buy all of the expensive inputs. Now, it's important to understand the role of what these things do. And in a small class like today, I don't expect anybody to really learn and memorize the roles, but I just want to point some of these things out. What is the role of a pest from an ecological point of view? Because from a farmer's point of view, a pest is something that needs to be watched out for and killed if you see it. But from an ecological point of view, or Mother Nature's point of view, a pest is a cleanup crew of unnatural phenomenons or dead and dying things. So if we have a field that is riddled with pests and disease, and we're ready to get the sprayer out and go out and kill them, what ecology is telling us is that our soils are so depleted in something that the plants are not growing strong enough. And so the pests come in to clean it up. Because what happens in nature where we do have functioning soils, the pests and the disease eat the old dying plants that are on the bottom of the plant or that have already fallen to the ground. That's what they're eating and consuming. And this is a hard one to teach agricultural people because we have worked our whole lives to grow healthy foods. And so we think that our crops are healthy because we're working so hard. But working hard does not actually mean soil health. And what we find is when we get the microbes in the soil, our crops actually do have enough sugars and proteins in them that when many of the pests try to eat the leaves are toxic to those pests, and they're not palatable to the pest until the leaves get old and are ready to die. So if we're having pest problems, what we actually have is a soil health problem. It's not a pest problem. And this is a similar mindset we need to change about weeds. If we have a lot of weeds coming up, we probably created that with our management, because weeds grow when we till. If we have a lot of tillage events and then we wait a few weeks and maybe we get a rain or we irrigated, and then you go out there and you see your ground and the weeds are just coming up thick like a carpet, that means that we have stimulated too much bacteria to grow because of the tillage event. We have killed off a lot of our beneficial fungal component in the soil, and that will make the weeds germinate like crazy. Because from an ecological point of view, the earth is trying to get to that forest that we talked about. And the first way to heal the ground is to cover it quickly. And the best way to cover it quickly is with red root amaranth and with lamb's quarters and other weeds that grow really quickly like that. All right, I think I'm going to move on here a little bit. There are certain groups in the world who talk about, like the permaculture group, the biodynamic group, they talk about doing things differently. And it's interesting because some of the very best soils in the world are some of the most unheard of. People who do biodynamics often have the best soils out there. The people with permaculture practices, they often have the very best soils out there. But these practices have not really been adopted by most gardeners and mainstream agriculture. And it's too bad, because if they can create the best soil, why aren't we doing what they did? It just makes sense that we would mimic that. And one thing that I'd just like to share with you, and this has to happen in context, because if you're raising hundreds of acres of corn, this isn't going to work. If you're raising alfalfa, this doesn't work. But oftentimes the very best soils happen when you have 7 layers of plants that are growing together. So this could include hundreds of species on a farm or ranch. So you would have overstory trees. So those would be tall trees. And then you have understory trees. Think of a fruit tree. And then you'd have shrubs. So, just think of woody plants that lose their leaves in the winter, but the skeleton, it's still there. So shrubs. And then there's the herbaceous plants. And those are plants that may get big, but they die completely back to the ground in the wintertime. And then you've got ground cover plants. You could think of your lawn, or in nature, it would be something like, what's the weed we all hate? Hedge bindweed or morning glory. Those would be something that's covering the ground. And then root layers would be things like carrots, or a weed that we all hate is perennial pepperweed. But those have an ecological purpose of those tap roots that go deep in the ground, and they are helping. And then there's the vine layer, which are plants that will grow up the trees. So if you have strictly a grazing system, this could be something you could incorporate in a grazing system. Now, if you're mowing hay, it doesn't work to have trees, obviously. So that goes back to context. So we would have to incorporate some of these things with proper context for sure. But some of the best soils out there have all of this diversity, including the giant trees, but we wouldn't have all giant trees. You wouldn't put 5,000 oak trees per acre, but you could have a very healthy ecosystem if you maybe had 15 or 20 giant oak trees per acre. And then you had other things in there. And so it's not so thick it won't grow grass, but you're going to grow more grass. And this is what we're seeing with people doing this. You're growing more grass and more legumes and more forbs for your grazers to eat when you have these 7 layers. And so this is a new mindset for people with livestock, because normally we think, oh, we just want a big, beautiful pasture, but they are actually not the most productive soils, and they're not producing as many calories per acre. So anyway, there's a lot of things like this that I think we could be incorporating into our gardens and our farms if we would. When we dig up roots to look at the soil, we want to be seeing different kinds of roots. We need to see the fibrous roots. Those roots are going to come from mostly the grasses. And we want to see tap roots. We all hate thistles, but a tap root in the soil could be very beneficial. I'm not saying to let your thistles go to seed, but where you have tap roots in the soil, you will be building soils. Also, when you're looking at roots, you want to see those dreadlock roots. And that is an analogy just meaning that you see soil attached to the roots. When I went to horticulture school in college, they taught me that you want to have nice white roots. If there's any soil on the root, or the roots are yellow, or they're any other color, then they're dying of a fungus. But now we know that many of those fungus are actually beneficial, and they are helping the plant to grow better. But we didn't know it 20 years ago when I was going to college. So this is relatively new science. So when we're digging up the roots, we want to be looking at those roots. And if the roots are big and fat and filled with, and soil is clinging all around each little individual root, that is a good sign. It means that the microbes that I mentioned earlier are working in your soil. So this is a simple thing you can do. Take your shovel out there and start digging. Dig in that soil. You should be seeing earthworms. You should be seeing all kinds of bugs. You should be seeing lots of things in those soils to have a healthy soil. The other thing about the soil is often the legumes will have the nodules on the roots. So you'll have the soil that's on the root, which is good. That's called the colonies of all the beneficial bacteria and fungus. And the nodules on the roots, they're little bumps on the root. And if you break those open, and you'll see these in legumes, you'll see these on things like alfalfas, clovers, vetches. If you break those open, they should be dark blood red. It should look like you cut your finger. When you squish it between your finger and your thumb, it should look like you cut your finger. That's the color if they are fixing nitrogen. The interesting thing is, in a lot of the gardening books of the past, they always say, oh, you need to have lots of legumes. What we're learning in the new science, it's good to have legumes, but we don't need as many as we thought we used to have, because there's a lot of bacteria in the soil that will fix nitrogen in the soil without legumes. We don't have to have the legume to get nitrogen. So rhizobium helps the soil to get nitrogen in it, but azobacter and azospirillum also do it. And those are the free nitrogen fixing organisms. They don't have to grow with a legume. So we don't have to have a certain number of legumes. So if you go out across your field and you don't hardly find legumes, it doesn't mean you're going to have a nitrogen deficiency. You just have to get the right organisms out there. Covering the ground is extremely important, and you can cover it with lots of things. But remember, the beneficial fungus is the hardest organism to get into our soils, and it's the easiest one to kill out. One tillage pass can kill 50% of our beneficial fungus. And many times we're tilling 3 or 4 times to put in a crop of whatever. So if we can avoid tilling, that's great. But in a gardening context, if you are covering your soils with things like cardboard and wood chips and compost, this is a good thing to do, because the cardboards and wood chips, those will be feeding your fungus. If you are a rancher and you're strictly dealing with cattle, sheep, livestock of different kinds, you will have fungal components from the cow manure. So the cattle are a fantastic creature because they are the best of all worlds. We can grow really great crops. We can have big, beautiful lettuces. We can have 28-pound cabbages with no fertilizer. I grew a lot of beautiful things in the last few years in my greenhouse. Zero man-made fertilizer. Lots of compost, lots of microbes, lots of looking in a microscope to make sure my microbes were there. Cauliflower. My daughter loves cauliflower. She had this giant, gorgeous cauliflower, and it's hard to grow cauliflower. A lot of farmers are side dressing halfway through the growing season with different kind of fertilizers to get cauliflower to grow. We can grow cauliflower, and the flavors are exceptional. And people who don't like vegetables come into my greenhouse and they start eating stuff because I halfway make them. And then they say, oh, I didn't know it tasted like this. This one's actually good. Because when your secondary metabolites are turned on, because you have so many microbes and you have such diversity of plants growing together, the flavors taste good. When plants are maturing, get your next plants growing. When I'm ready to pick my green beans, that's when I'm planting the next crop. And when you look at my garden, you will often see new seeds coming up around other crops. Bean plant, it may be growing for another 5-6 weeks while the other crops are getting up to that height. By the time the green beans, I'm done picking them, the other crops are almost ready to harvest. So we don't have to wait for one crop to be done before the next crop is growing. Now, in some systems you do, but not in a system where your soil is functioning and you have a massive amount of beneficial microbes in an oxygenated soil. We can do a lot of tests. There's a lot of tests and tools we can use. We're not going to really go into that today, but there are a lot of things you can do. If people say you can't grow lettuce, you can grow lettuce. You need to test many varieties in your area to find the ones that will grow in cold weather and the varieties that will grow in hot weather. And you can get that figured out by planting them side by side in the summer. And then you know which ones will grow and which ones won't. So we do all of these things to enhance the ecological processes. Anytime we make a management decision on our soil, whether it's a garden or a ranch or a grain cropping system, always you have to answer, yes, it will enhance energy flow. Yes, it will enhance my succession. Yes, it will enhance my water cycle and my mineral cycle. If you make a management decision and it's going to hurt one of these, say no and don't do it. Even if it helps another one. Oh, this is really going to help my water cycle, but it's going to throw my ecological succession back to early succession. Don't do it because you're starting over. So you have to answer yes, it's going to help all of these before you move forward with your management. You can change your succession and you can kill out noxious weeds by understanding what plants grow in which succession. So instead of fighting weeds with herbicides every year, we can get to a point, and here again, it's a 3 to 5 year process of functioning soil, but you can get to a point where your soils will function and you will start killing out the weeds you don't want. This is one of my students last year. I run a school in the summers, and he did a project to build a leaky weirs. A leaky weir is a man-made beaver dam. He made 60 something of these, like 67, just up the little creek that comes past our place through the ranch. It slowed down the water, and we actually saw more wildlife in these areas where there were little pools. There's fish in these pools. I've seen them there this spring, and before there weren't. And they're just wild fish, because further up on the mountain they're there, but they've made it down into these pools. And it helps the entire ecology to be better. So there's simple things like this we can do to help the water cycle. And there's my graduates from last year. And this is pretty much the end of my presentation. Let's open this up for questions and answers. And if you want my contact info, those are my students for this year. They just got here last week. So that's fun. And if you want to learn what I learned, these are my people. You might want to get your phone out and just take a quick picture of this. These are some of the greatest scientists and people who've taught me over the years. Many of these people are dead. I just read their books and their works. I was trying to get to my website. There's my website on the bottom here, www.georgicrevolution.com. You can contact me here if this is where you want to contact me and talk about anything. So Jared, let's do Q&A.
Great, thank you, William. Thank you. That was a lot of information, but very relevant. I think, again, regardless of whether we are small scale, large scale, anywhere in between, those principles apply. So I'll just go through some of the questions here on the chat in the order that they came in. Do you ever worry about, or you can probably read it too, William, do you ever, I'll just say it out loud for the recording. Do you ever worry about families that are said not to plant together, such as tomatoes with cabbages or brassicas? Or do you solely focus on the 4 different plant families?
You know, there's a lot of books out there about you shouldn't plant this with that. It doesn't like it. I've never actually seen that happen in any of my gardens. If a plant is dying, I've never seen it because it was by another plant. Something else was going on in the soil. And maybe the plant that did well was more tolerant of a non-functioning soil. What I've found in my experience is if you focus on a minimum of 4 plant families and even let a few weeds grow so you can get 5 or 6 plant families in there, you are going to have maximum plant health no matter what plants are growing together. That's been my experience.
Great. Question about weeds. I've got Scotch thistle, cotton thistle, Scotch thistle. Yeah, it's considered invasive. What can I do to change the soil so it goes away? Great question.
Yeah, so thistles are kind of in the early succession stage. They're on the late side of early succession. So you need more fungus, more beneficial fungus in your soil. Thistles will grow and germinate where you have compacted soil. And so ecologically, they're trying to grow and break up the soil because they have that big taproot that goes down in. Sometimes I will let some thistles grow, but don't tell Jared that because my job is to chop thistles.
You just don't let them go to seed, right?
Yeah. So that's my point. We never let thistles go to seed. But if they're growing for a while, it's interesting because when we go around the ranch, we'll have barren places and the only thing growing is the thistles. And if you let them go for a while, but you don't let the seeds ripen, grass will start growing around those thistles. They're almost a nurse plant to help grow grass. Now, if you have acres of thistles, you can't really mess with that and let that happen, or they all bloom and those seeds are flying before you can get to them. So your management, you have to be careful. But if you just have a couple of thistle plants out there, watch it, and there's a good chance that grass seed will start germinate and start growing around the thistles. So that's just an interesting ecological phenomenon that happens.
Very good. Yeah, a lot to learn about weeds, and I think the more we learn, the more we realize that they're just nature's first responder. They're just an indicator of management. They're not the problem, they're the symptom, right, William?
Right, exactly.
And then next question, where does the majority of phosphorus come from in the soil if you don't add NPK or synthetic fertilizers?
Okay, fantastic question. I love answering this one because a lot of people ask it. And this is a good one. All soils, and we can never say all in this world because you're going to find a soil where this isn't true, but 99.9999999% of soils everywhere on earth have every nutrient that a plant needs to grow. Okay. Now, they're not in plant available form, but the function of bacteria and fungus is they will break down, and we call this mineralization. So they will mineralize the sands, silts, and clays into the plant food. So if you have the right biology in the soil, and we're talking 250 to 300,000 species of good bacteria and fungus in the soil, they will melt down those rocks that are already there, and they will be creating your phosphorus for you because the phosphorus is already there. And so this is a new thing. No, the soil sciences, the universities, they're not really teaching that yet. They're starting to, but you know, the graduates that have been coming out for the last 20 years, we've never heard that. But that is the truth, and that's what's happening. So we don't have to worry about the plant foods and getting the fertilizers in the soil, because that's not what they're deficient in. Soils are deficient in the proper microbes that will melt down the sand, silts, and clays with their powerful enzymes to make the plant food available.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I really appreciate that, because that kind of flies in the face of what traditional science says, right? Is that you have to, there's your soils where you just aren't going to grow anything. But basically that's because the soils are dead.
Right.
Okay. So follow up, is there biodynamic treatment for Scotch thistle? Denise, do you want to just, if you're available, why don't, sometimes it's hard to answer questions without more context here. So maybe just kind of tell us what kind of scale you're looking at. Are you looking at like one plant in a garden or hundreds of acres or something?
Thankfully not hundreds of acres, but I mean, I'm out on the prairie, and when I first got here, there was a patch that was probably a quarter of an acre. But I mean, it is just a wicked little plant. It's not little. I mean, it grows, some of them I've had to saw out. I couldn't even shovel them out. I had to use a saw to cut them. But I mean, even the stem is winged and it has 1-inch spines on it. So, and also where I live, it's considered invasive and we can be fined for it, though I don't think they actually fine people for it.
Mm-hmm.
But like right now, it's supposedly a biennial, but right now I have a patch that's, I don't know, 30 by 60 on one spot. And then like in the corral area, I just keep going in circles. Every night I spend an hour or two and I just go in circles and keep chopping and chopping and chopping and chopping.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's good job security, if nothing else. And if you've got kids though, there's always a chore for them to do.
Okay,
I'll let William give you the other answer. We've got a lot of thistles on a property as well. And so we're working at it, but William will give you the technical answer.
Okay, so as far as a biodynamic treatment, I'm not sure. I mean, there probably is, but I don't know. So there's that. The thing about the thistles is they're biennials, so they're going to come up and they're going to grow a crown the first year. The second year is when they go to seed. If you go out there and you get those all chopped out, you can eradicate them. It feels like you can't, but you can. Now, if you let them go to seed, you've got to realize that those seeds are going to be viable for 100 years, maybe longer. Nobody really knows, I don't think. So when the conditions are correct on the right year, that's just right for those to sprout, you could have seeds sprouting forever. And so that doesn't sound very nice. But if you control them just with a shovel when they're coming up in the spring and summertime, you can do a lot of good and you can get your ranch to the point where you don't see very many thistles. First year I got here to Jared's place, there was like 1/8 of an acre patch and it was pretty serious. And I went out there and I chopped them all out. Last year there were about 8 or 9. And this year I walked it just the other day when I was changing irrigation and I didn't see any coming up.
Yeah.
So, you know, they are manageable with a shovel. You can get rid of them. And if you want to go the chemical route, there's sprays where you can knock them down too. If you had millions of acres of them, maybe that's the thing to do at first. just to get to a point where you can function. I normally don't tell people to ever use toxicity sprays because those will kill the microbes in your soil that I just spent an hour preaching about. So you want to avoid the sprays.
Is there, like in the patch that I think the horses are eating a patch down now and it's the rosette stage. Is there anything that I could plant there after the horses are gone and after I've chopped the thistle out that might preclude that from growing again? It seems to grow in different patches every year.
I wish I knew the answer to that. And when you find it out, you're going to be a millionaire. So no, I don't know of something you can plant that'll crowd out the thistle. But if you change your succession by getting more fungus in there, so if you had a really good compost, it will avoid those from growing in the first place. And your grasslands would thrive better too. So from the biological point of view, those seeds won't even sprout if you get your soils aerated and the porous sphere working good, get rid of the compaction, they're not going to be growing.
Okay. That's great. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Yep, great question. So we are going to have somebody come on to talk about biodynamics, and they're not on the schedule yet, but he can talk about that. There are some things that you can do from a biodynamic side, and I would just say if you believe that it works, it will work. If you question and say that's hokey, then it probably won't work. So just do what works in your context. Nicole Masters says, so another question, 90% of phosphorus comes from soil organic matter. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I would certainly agree with that. If you're starting with a soil with no organic matter and you get really good microbiome in there that's working, they will be releasing that from the sand, silts, and clays. But yeah, as far as the mineral cycle works, it just keeps recycling through the growing plants that have died. And so the dead, decaying plant matter, and it's not just phosphorus, it's a lot of the nutrients that plants use are recycled that way. So yeah, I would agree completely.
Mm-hmm. Another question, if you don't have access to wood chips, is sawdust another good option? Pros and cons.
Yeah, so sawdust can be an issue because it's such a fine particulate. If you're using a lot of sawdust in certain applications, it can cut out the oxygen, and then whatever you're doing could become anaerobic. So I generally say don't use sawdust. If you did use sawdust, just to get fungal food out there, you could put it on a pasture or something, but you would want to spread it very thin. See, wood chips in a garden context, you can put it 6, 8, 12 inches deep in a garden. It works good. But if you use sawdust at that depth, it's going to cut out the oxygen, and we need as much oxygen as we can get into the soil. So it would be very bad to use thick layers of sawdust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a couple more questions, comments here. Thanks, Justin, for your comment. And Richard, yeah, no-till. Drills available in Buell, Idaho area. Corn and squash could shade out thistle. Yeah, definitely if you have something fast growing and irrigation water, again, things that fit your context. Would sawdust tie up in?
Sawdust tying up nitrogen only if you till it into the soil. Sawdust and wood chips is not a nitrogen problem unless you're tilling it in. Here again, just think of the analogy of mimicking nature. Nothing out in nature is tilling in all the tree limbs that fall on the ground. I mean, they get covered over time with leaves. They'll get covered when the wind is blowing whatever blows in the wind. Mostly it's leaf debris, and it'll be piling up on the soil surface. But when we go in there mechanically with shovels, with 400 horsepower machines, and we're burying stuff in the ground, the moldboard plow burying stuff, yeah, a lot of that woody stuff certainly can tie up nitrogen. But when we're mimicking nature and just putting it on the soil surface, that doesn't really seem to happen. Here again, this is a good reason to not be tilling, because the microbes that are doing our work for us, they know what to do with it if it's on the soil surface. And it makes it a lot easier too. So we don't need to be worrying about all the hard work. You know, you can sell your 150 horsepower tractor that you use for tillage, get an 80 horsepower tractor. You saved a lot of money there on your tractor payments. So that's one way farmers can be more profitable.
Yeah, maybe we'll just kind of end with one question about profitability. William, maybe speak to that just a little bit about what it would cost and the feasibility of being able to do a biological program on large acreages.
Okay, yeah, if you wanted to get the microbes into a large acres, let's say a 10,000 acre ranch, and you want to get microbes out there, the best thing to do is to go probably to one of the ranching for profit seminars or something like that, where you're learning to move cattle properly. When you can move cattle properly across the land, that's how you get the microbes out there. That's the very best way. The second to best way, which is almost as good as cattle, would be making compost. So both of these are fantastic. Okay. But when it comes to profitability, where you can make this stuff, you can apply this stuff, you get it on there, and we're doing it once means an event, and in the event you may apply it 3 or 4 times within 1 year. That restores the microbes to the ground, and then if you keep them alive by giving them food and water, which you do by grazing the cattle, their urine is on the ground, and people think, oh, well, a cow's urine isn't enough to keep the ground hydrated. It is if you have 200 cows per acre every 12 hours, it will hydrate that land. It does matter, and it will work. And so as you're going along, throughout this whole ranch, moving cattle and getting out compost extracts, restoring this whole microbiome, whatever you choose to do, whether it's a combination or just one of them, it's a one-time event, and then you're done. Compared to fertilizer, you're buying that every year, forever. And right now, it's agriculture's most expensive input, which is miserable because agriculture has a lot of expensive inputs. And like I said, it's a 3 to 5 year process to get to that point. So you wouldn't just stop using fertilizer and think you're going to get a bunch of bugs out there that are going to do it. You have to have a plan. You need to work out a plan within the context of your climate, the crops you're growing, the livestock you have access to. If you had, say, 200 acres of corn and 400 acres of pasture, you can use that livestock to inoculate the microbes into the cornfield during the time of year when you're not growing corn. So, in the late fall after the corn harvest, early spring, you can be rotating those cattle through there. So anyway, those are my thoughts on that.
Perfect. We'll probably go ahead and stop the recording here. For those that are on live, if you want to stay on for another few minutes, we could dive into some one-on-one with William. But William, thank you for joining us. We certainly appreciate the knowledge and expertise. And are there any final thoughts that you have before we conclude this?
I'm full of all kinds of thoughts. No, this can be done. For people who haven't done this, it can be super overwhelming, especially when I have a bunch of charts on here and there's all these words that people haven't even ever heard before. It looks overwhelming, but it's actually not. It's just a matter of a little education, working with a mentor for a couple of seasons, getting some education under your belt, and you start doing it, you start messing it up, and you start asking your mentor, well, I did this, and they'll say, oh, you almost did it right. After a few years, you're going to get there. Don't be intimidated by this, because you can save an amazing amount of money, which will make your ranch profitable. You don't have to sell more products to get profitable. You can sell less product and be more profitable because you don't have as many expenses. You just get the mentor, get the education, and there's people who can help you. There's a lot of people. Alan Williams told us a couple of months ago in his presentation that we're up close to 38 million acres who have switched over to this kind of thing. So this is not new. It's not experimental. You're not going to fail unless you simply don't get the mentor and don't get the education. You can do this because 38 million acres are doing it. It's working. It's working in the deserts. It's working in brittle environments, non-brittle environments. It's working in Europe, North America. It's working in every environment we can think of where people grow food. It's working. Those are my thoughts.
Good way to end it. We appreciate that. And yes, amen. It definitely does work. And William is a great mentor. He does consulting. You can do farm and garden tours, ranch tours, get to work with him one-on-one. So any of those available, any of those opportunities are available. Again, the website is georgicrevolution.com, right, William?
Yes.
For those that are listening in, georgicrevolution.com. And if you want to learn more about what we do at AgSteward, agsteward.fyi. We do these twice a month, the second and fourth Thursdays. The goal of this is to be able to expand our education. I like the analogy that the greatest compaction is between our two ears, and that's really where it starts. So where William's helping to break up that compaction and gets oxygen and air to our brain so that we can solve the significant problems that we face. And definitely they are significant, ever increasing, but not insurmountable. Because I believe that we can tap into infinite intelligence. We can find the answers that we need. God's given us stewardships, the ability to be able to steward the earth, prepare it, and help it to flourish and grow. And a lot of those things that we have here are just here to help us to be able to learn the weeds, the diseases, the fires, the floods, and all the natural disasters and things. I believe that they're not a punishment. They're here to help us. So with that mindset, we can truly progress and we can grow. So thanks everybody for joining in.